Have you heard about the new MagnaGrip Pro nozzle? The MagnaGrip Pro nozzle is the easiest, most advanced nozzle ever, protecting you from the dangers of diesel exhaust fumes. With its patented flex magnet technology, the Pro nozzle easily attaches with one hand from a standing position, can snap on from any angle, and fits flush to the apparatus, saving a ton of space. And MagnaGrip is the only exhaust removal system that offers a true 100% seal. For free grant assistance and to learn more, go to magnagrip.com.
This fire engineering podcast is made possible by Tenkata Protective Fabrics. The global leader in flame-resistant fabrics, Tenkata Protective Fabrics enables millions of people worldwide to be great at what they do. Generations of industry professionals serving in the fire service, industrial, and military industries rely on Tenkata fabrics for safety, comfort, and confidence. From the harshest working conditions to the welcoming sight of home, Tenkata recognizes the people they're protecting are unique individuals whose lives extend beyond work. Supporting a world of evolving needs, Tenkata's innovations lead the way in user-centric design, technology, and sustainability around the globe. To learn more, please visit tenkatafabrics.com.
Hello there, and welcome to Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio in this installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, the podcast dedicated to our great volunteer fire service and getting all of our listeners to embrace the message that developing and displaying and maintaining a professional image and reputation are the duty and responsibility of all firefighters, and true professionalism is not defined by any paycheck. Tom Merrill here, so glad to have you joining in. As always, I'd like to thank Chief Bobby Halton and the fire engineering family for the opportunity to bring you my podcast and also the opportunity for you to listen to all the other great fire engineering podcasts that allow me and my colleagues to talk about this great fire service and focus on so many important and timely topics as well. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, too. I really do, because obviously you are passionate about the fire service and you have a strong desire to stay in tune with what's going on and what's happening, the latest trends, the events, news, and that's really a credit to you. And that in itself defines professionalism. So thank you for that. And thanks again for listening in to this episode of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Now, a couple things going on that I need to talk about before bringing the guest on. Of course, FDIC 2023 will be in Indianapolis in April, from April 24th to the 29th, and I certainly hope to see you there. This year, I'm going to be doing a classroom session, an hour and 45-minute Professional Volunteer Fire Department presentation, and I would love the opportunity to meet you and see you there so we can talk about what it means to be a professional volunteer firefighter serving in a professional volunteer fire department. FDIC 2023, April 24th to the 29th in Indianapolis. And I am working really hard, talked about it on a couple shows now, finishing up my book, The Professional Volunteer Fire Department, finishing up for Penwell. Hopefully it'll be released at FDIC. Love to see you there if I can get it done by then. I had a great talk with the editor the other day. Things are moving along fine on it. And this book is going to talk about the things that are under your personal control to truly exemplify what it means to be a professional volunteer firefighter and to help your department be a professional volunteer fire department. Things that I learned, things that have been passed on to me, stories I can share, and I'm really looking forward to getting that book out and released, hopefully by FDIC next year. And I hope you can make it. I hope you really get a chance to take in that great FDIC experience, because you definitely will leave Indianapolis more fired up, more motivated, and it's a real kick in the pants to go back home and just do great things. I've been out talking about professional volunteer firefighters and meeting so many professional volunteer firefighters. I was just down to the great state of Louisiana a couple of weeks ago. I presented at the St. Martin Parish Fire District at their company officer leadership conference, which was in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana. Just had an absolutely fantastic time. Great people there doing amazing work. They truly defined professionalism in everything that they did, and it just was a great, great visit. I spent the afternoon there talking about the professional volunteer fire department, and I sat in on a morning session. Chief Mark Bashore, who many of you know is the executive editor for firerescue1.com, he did an excellent program focusing on leadership and coping skills, and it was called Lead, Follow, or Get Out of the Way. And I tell you what, the chief discussed many real life scenarios and indiscretions that occur in our industry, and he provided appropriate actions and remedies for all the situations he talked about. And I've really found the class to be just highly informative, extremely interesting, and it actually is very, very helpful for my role as a fire commissioner back home. Never stop learning, right? Never stop learning. A great couple days there in Breaux Bridge. And again, came home meeting a bunch of new friends, new fire service friends. And that happens every time I go out. The fire service is filled with great people doing great things. And I'm excited. Next week, I'm going off to Collegedale, Tennessee, which is in the Chattanooga area, again to present my professional volunteer fire department class. And I'm looking forward to meeting even more fire service people and making even more fire service friends. And then in November, I'll be down in Clearwater Beach, Florida to the VCOS conference. We weren't sure if that was going to be going on because, as you probably know, Ian targeted the Tampa Clearwater area, and that certainly brought a lot of devastation south of there. Clearwater made out well, and the conference is still on. Of course, it's going to be tempered atmosphere with everything, that devastation down in Florida. And I don't think any one of us doesn't know somebody that wasn't affected. My own sister had her place get pretty much wiped out. It's just horrible down there, horrible devastation. And of course, my thoughts, and I know all of your thoughts and prayers are with everybody there as they struggle through this hard work of cleaning up and rebuilding. But the VCAS conference is a go, and I'm going to be there on from November 8th to the 12th, presenting on Thursday that week, the professional volunteer. I got to head out a day early on Saturday because I have some personal things going on back home. But hopefully I'll see you there because these conferences are fantastic. They always amaze me, and I say it all the time. It's something we've got to get our newer members in the fire service to embrace and understand that all of these venues introduce us to so many fire service professionals. And again, remind me, and they will remind anybody going, that there are so many great people involved in this fire service. And there's so much good in the world. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit on the show today, that in today's nasty world, the fire service is a great reminder that there are still a lot of very good, kind-hearted, caring, wonderful people in the world. And so often they can be found at their local volunteer firehouse. So on this episode of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, I am extremely humbled. I'm honored. I'm actually in awe of tonight's guest because he's a man who epitomizes true professionalism, a man who has enjoyed certainly an incredible career, both on the volunteer side as well as the career side, or as my listeners know, what I like to say, the paid side of the fire service, because so many of us can make a career out of being a volunteer firefighter. But anyway, I'm pleased to welcome onto the show retired FDNY Chief of Department, which, by the way, is the highest ranking uniform position in that agency. Retired FDNY Chief of Department, Thomas Richardson. He's also a longtime volunteer firefighter, which I thought was perfect then to bring him on the show. Because in addition to being the chief of department for the FDNY, he served as chief of his volunteer department back home, which is in Deer Park, New York, which is, I believe, I live in New York State. You think I think that's the Long Island part of the state, but I just thought it would be so cool to bring him on the show because he's seen so much, he's experienced so much, and he definitely can relate to the volunteer side of things. So I just thought it was, a great idea to bring him in, and I thought it would be fun and educational to have him talk about his fire service career, his journey, some of the people that he worked alongside. Of course, many legendary names over the years that perhaps, hopefully, you listeners have, maybe not, maybe some you're not familiar with, and we'll talk about that. But I also thought it would be educational because he's had some very, very sage advice to pass on. I've had an opportunity to sit in on one of his lectures back at the New York State Chiefs Conference back in June. I took pages and notes, and so he's got lessons to pass on. He's got information to share that can help all of us. And again, no matter what role we play in our hometown volunteer department. So without further ado, Chief, welcome to the show. I can't tell you what an honor it is to have you on the episode of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, especially taking the time with your busy schedule to be with us here today. So thank you. It's incredibly gracious of you to make the time to be on here with me.
Well, Tom, I appreciate you having me, and it's always a pleasure to be able to speak to the network that we call the fire service, volunteer career, and there's so many good people in this business. And as you know, we're both from New York State, and as you stated correctly, Deer Park is down on Long Island in Suffolk County. So Long Island has Nassau County, Suffolk County. Very unique, Long Island. It really is. I mean, when you look at the population of Long Island, there's almost 3 million people live on Long Island. Suffolk County has 109 fire departments, 27 or 28 volunteer ambulance corps, and Nassau County has 71 fire departments, and they also have some volunteer ambulance corps. So it's a very unique system on Long Island because it's 99.9% volunteer. The only paid fire service out on Long Island right now, full-time, is the city of Long Beach in Nassau County. They have a paid engine company around the clock, 7 days a week. There's one department out in the eastern end of Long Island that most recently realized that they were having a problem during the daytime, and they now have hired part-time firefighters that work 12-hour shifts from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they come off of what is now a Suffolk County civil service list for firefighters.
Oh, wow.
You have to meet certain criteria, and then any department or any district on the island can use that list if they want to hire certified, qualified firefighters to operate and work in their department. So there's only one department that's doing it right now, but I think the future is probably going to start to lead more and more to that.
Yeah, certainly seeing it more and more throughout the country. And you know what I've always said with that, that's great to do that, but where I've seen it happen, where they hire a small full-time or part-time staff, they're still supplemented by volunteers.
100%.
So the volunteers aren't going away. This is the new way.
Nor should they, quite frankly, right? Because we all got into the business as young people to help our communities. I mean, I live in the community that I grew up in. I moved to this community when I was 3 years old. My parents moved out from New York City, from Brooklyn, and I've been in the community since then. And so I grew up here. I raised my children here. I'm still involved, not only as a past chief, but as we've spoken earlier, I'm on the board of fire commissioners as well. So what we've seen also on Long Island is a whole evolution of many, many, many fire departments, fire districts, and even the ambulance corps now going to paid emergency medical folks, EMTs and paramedics. My district alone, I would argue right now, our district is just about fully paid staff around the clock. And we have few EMS volunteers, and then our entire fire response is all volunteer firefighters.
Now, does your department run EMS calls, though, back up the paid service? How does that work?
Right. So our department is a community of about 30,000 people, 4.5 square miles. And we do almost 4,000 calls a year, of which 85% of them are EMS calls. So our EMS calls initially are responded to by our paid staff, and then we supplement with some volunteers. So we have very few EMS volunteers. We're trying to get more, but we have full-time, around-the-clock ALS service, quite frankly. We have EMTs that we employ as well, but people in our community are getting an ALS service initially on every call. So it's a good service. It costs a lot of money too, you know what I mean? But we're providing a good service. And many departments on the island are using the same model.
Yeah. Is that a private service or is it funded by the fire service?
No, it's part of our fire district. So our fire district funds it through taxpayer dollars, through our budget. Our budget's a little over $4 million a year, of which almost 25% of the budget is our EMS program.
Okay. Wow. Interesting. That does bring up ours is in my area. We have paid ALS that does the transporting too, but it's a private ambulance company. So our volunteers respond on a first responder basis. They're supplemented by the paid transport agency, and it's worked out well for us, but it really doesn't cost a dime to us because it's a private company. So very interesting. So and the other thing I thought was, I'm the same as you. I'm talking to you in the house I grew up in. This is where I grew up. I bought the house. My dad built this house when my mom was getting older and said, I got to get out because there's too many stairs. That was about 15 years ago. My wife and I bought it because we had a lot of kids and it's a big house. And so here I still am, and the kids went to school where I went to school. And so cool, same boat there. A little different though. You got, what is that, 4.5 square miles, 30,000 residents?
Yes.
Wow.
And then during the day, it's probably upwards of 50 or plus people in the community. We have a pretty large industrial and business base. So it's pretty busy place, a lot of traffic, very densely populated. And the community has evolved over the 45 years I've been in the fire department.
Wow. So I was going to ask you this later on, but we might as well delve into it now. Tell me about the Deer Park Fire Department then, for that type of population and that many runs. I think he says 4,000 runs a year. I know primarily EMS, but still, that's a lot of runs. Are you doing that 100% volley?
So all of our EMS runs, like I said, predominantly our EMS response is paid, but we do about anywhere between 500 and 700 fire responses, and that includes automatic alarms, motor vehicle accidents, structure fires, all kinds of other miscellaneous type fires. We do about maybe 10 or 12 working fires per year in our community, and the fire response is all volunteers. And as you know, this is a problem throughout the country in the volunteer fire service. It's getting more and more difficult, and it has been for quite some time, to get people to join.
Right.
We're all having a recruitment and a retention problem. I recently sat on a webinar. I think Lexapol sponsored a webinar specifically on recruitment and retention. And the biggest point that I took out of it, it's mostly a retention problem.
Yes.
We can get people, but when we get them, we seem to lose them.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes we don't really do a really good job of explaining what type of commitment it is. This is tough work. This is not for everybody. And it requires a lot of your time. And people today, as you know, time is a problem for folks, right?
Right.
Who's, working and raising families, and you need 2-income households today to survive. And so there's a lot of challenges for the fire service, particularly the volunteer service going forward. But I would even say that this webinar even talked about in the career service. There's places around the country, fire departments, career fire departments, that are struggling to get people to take the exam or to join their fire departments as career firefighters. So we don't have that problem in New York City. The last firefighter exam, I think we had 50,000 people taking
50,000.
But it's a city of 8.5 million people too, plus the surrounding counties.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, who would have thought, right? You see it on, on the social media sites, a lot of paid departments throughout the country really advertising that they're hiring. And when I look, I always dig deep into it just to check out salary and benefits. A lot of them are good paying jobs too.
Yeah.
And it amazes me because I think back, 40 years ago when I was a young man, how I would have just,
You and me both.
killed to take that job. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's amazing. It is a different world. And on the volunteer side, I sat in on that webinar as well, Chief, and it was a great seminar and definitely took that same point away that retention is actually probably a little harder in some cases than recruitment. And
Yeah.
one thing I found in my area, I like to do, and I recommend companies do exit interviews when people leave. It's you think you know why they're leaving, but truly sit down and just be, very professional about it and what's leading you to leave. And a couple people that I've talked to, it's jobs and family and that, but they also pointed out that, the advertisement that they saw was all gung-ho firefighting, cutting people out of cars. And there's a lot more routine day-to-day things that go into it. And if we don't create a nice, warm firehouse environment where they want to be there, it's
Mhm.
easy to lose them. And there's a lot that goes into that. That's probably a subject for a whole nother show for
You're
sure.
not kidding. You're not kidding. I agree 100%.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, I wanted to start off with, I mean, you were the chief of department for arguably the most well-known, most popular, and certainly biggest department anywhere. And you're also a longtime volunteer firefighter. So I wanted to get your input, your opinion, observations regarding my main premise that I've talked about on this show since it started 8, 9 years ago. The main premise of my presentations that I do, and that's focusing on just being a professional. And if you're a volunteer, being a professional volunteer, and the fact that it's not a paycheck that automatically defines you as a professional. So I mean, again, Chief Richardson, well-known chief, big department. Do you support that premise, Chief?
I absolutely support that premise, and I would argue that people that get into this first responder business, I think that in my heart of hearts, I truly believe this, that you have to have it in your heart. You have to want to do this. Like, it's one thing to want to serve your community. There are all kinds of organizations in our various communities where you can join and volunteer your time, right? You could join the Knights of Columbus. You could join the Sons of Italy. You could join so many different organizations. You could be involved with your church and provide and give some time, back to the community. But when you get into this business, oftentimes people will always hear me say, anytime I make a presentation about some of the traits that I would pass on to people that I've mentored over the years, is when you get into this business, career or volunteer, if you want to be good at it, if you want to be as safe as possible at it, and you really want to be a good firefighter, a good EMT, a good paramedic, you have to be a student of the business, right? So you have to constantly be on top of your game to maintain your skill level, to maintain your skills, to be able to do the job. I mean, there's a whole physical fitness side of this business, right? Obviously. And as we get older, sometimes we maybe are not able to do the things we used to do when we were young. But I would say, I got into the business because I saw how much my dad loved it. My dad was a Korean War Marine. He was a tough guy. He joined the volunteer fire department later in life. He was in his 30s. And I just saw how much he loved it. And I was a kid. And I said, wow, that's pretty interesting. Here's my dad working, a full-time job, maybe two jobs at the time, even because I was the oldest of five kids. And he worked for Con Edison, the utility company in New York City in Westchester County. And he was a lineman, worked a lot, but he loved it, took it serious, really became a student of it, and worked his way up through the ranks, becoming the chief of the department as well. And so it was fun to watch. And I think that the title of your program, the professional volunteer, right? I mean, this is a vocation. This isn't like a career type thing, like in my opinion. It's something that you fall in love with. It's something that you want to do. It's something that kind of just you're drawn to it because you want to serve, and you want to serve in a way where you're literally potentially saving lives, right? That's a big deal. Like, I think we take it for granted a lot as firefighters and medical people. We take for granted what we do is life saving, but all of us that have been there, where you really literally save a life, whether it's from a fire, from a motor vehicle accident, cutting somebody out of a car, or doing CPR on somebody on an ambulance call, and you bring them back to life. Like, what's better than that in this world? Like
Right.
I mean, there's nothing better than that. There's nothing better than service, in my opinion. You could serve in the military. That's really, uh, that's the greater good, right? Like any of this stuff that we do, military, fire, healthcare, it's for the greater good, man. And that's what I think drew me to it. And I think that that's why I hope that people that take on these businesses and these types of work, um, you got to be a student of it. You have to stay in it all the time. Like right now, you could go online today. I mean, if people tell me they can't learn or find any new information or stay on top of their game, there's so many resources.
Ain't that the truth?
Oh my God, it's crazy, right? You don't have to agree with it all, right? But at least it's out
No, you got to stay in touch. Matter of fact, I was just at the firehouse last night about 11 o'clock. We had an alarm call. I go up to the firehouse, and one of our brand new probies is there. And she's reassembling her gear and things after call. I don't even know what got us talking about. Oh, she's taking firefighter one. So we were talking, and she's all excited to learn. And I said, my 40th anniversary in my department is November 1st. It's coming up quick. And I said, I still am learning, because you never know it all, and
there. That's right.
you're never a veteran enough to know it all. You got to stay in touch with what's going on.
I always tell people, and I've said this throughout my career, if you think you have it, it's time to go. If
Yeah.
you think you got this, it's time to go, because this business will humble you very, very quickly on any given day. You could be on the top of your game, right? Think about professional athletes, the really high level professional athletes, and you watch them often have bad days or games, like, right? And that's just like this. Like, you could be a firefighter, an officer, a chief officer, thinking, I'm pretty good. But then you go to an operation and you say, wow, I screwed that one up. You know what I mean? Thank God we work as a team. So hopefully the other team members pick up the slack, and we get the job done, because it never goes 100% perfectly, as we know.
An expression I heard about you, and you might actually said it. It was about being about being pride and professionalism. I think it was in an interview we did with WNYF that term came out. So I love it, because it's my line too. Be a proud professional firefighter. And those first few things you already talked about play into that equation. I mean, who wouldn't want to be interested in the fire service? You joined it, and in our case, my case especially, volunteered for it. Don't you want to be interested? Don't you want to know what's going on and pay attention? And don't you want to, by extension of that, be safe in what you're doing, or as safe as possible?
Right. I think I tell people all the time. I would say this in the FDNY in particular, when I would watch young probationary firefighters, graduate probie school, which is 18 weeks long, and it's very, very hard, both physically, emotionally, mentally. It's just a difficult program. But if you graduate probie school, you're ready to go out to the firehouse. But now, and I say this to people all the time. When you're on probation, I think volunteer or career, I say, you're not a firefighter. Now you're just starting out. Now it's us, the senior folks, the officers, the chief officers that you're going to be exposed to. We got to make you into a firefighter. We got to take you down the road. We got to show you the way.
Right.
So many, many times I say, nobody wants to be a horrible firefighter. At least I don't think. I know I didn't want to. I wanted to be a good firefighter, right? You want to be one of the best compliments you could get in this business is he or she's a good firefighter, right? When somebody says that, you say, wow, that's a big deal. And so, nobody wants to be bad at this work. Now, I would argue sometimes people get into this work for the wrong reasons. Sometimes more so on the volunteer side. I think sometimes when we're recruiting people, we spend a lot of time on explaining to them the benefits, right, of joining. The social atmosphere, the parties, the all the training that you can get. But I think sometimes we spend too much time on that, and really we're not honest with people, and that's where that retention thing comes in.
Mm-hmm.
We're honest with people. Think about firefighter one today. How hard that firefighter one course is very, very hard. I'm tutoring a group of folks right now in a firefighter one course. I meet with them once a week to kind of help them along. And it is hard. It's a lot of work. They have
Mm-hmm.
to spend a lot of time reading and studying. And so you got to invest in this. If you want to be good at it, you have to invest. And
Right.
that goes with any profession, quite frankly, right? You got to invest. You have to invest time. You have to invest effort. You got to invest your heart in order to want to be good, or to evidently to ever get good at it. Like, right? You got to
Right.
invest.
You say how much time it takes in the investment you make. And then you got to remember some of these people that you're tutoring, some of these people that are going on to the firefighter one class 2 or sometimes 3 times a week or all day on a Saturday, whatever. That's after working, which probably their exhausting paycheck earning job or
Yep.
taking care of whatever's got to be taken care of at the house, right? And that's where retention comes in too, is important as it is that they're learning that and going to the training. Sometimes instructors need to keep that in mind too. I've heard some professional people that have joined the volunteer fire service uh almost want to leave because of the way they've been treated by some instructors, sometimes not having. Yeah, it's such a double-edged sword there,
Yeah.
but you got to be cognizant of
I
that.
was reading an article recently in one of the trade magazines. They were talking about, because of the amount of time necessary now to become a firefighter one candidate, it's almost like fire chiefs, fire officers, members of the organization probably should just let these kids or these gals and men concentrate on firefighter one. Don't even make them like do all the other things that they have to do as new members of a company or a department.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get them through the firefighter one. And because, right, a lot of places, mine included sometimes, they put all these demands on these folks
Yeah.
while they're trying to go through these programs. And
Right.
hey, why don't we just mentor them? Why don't we kind of help them along and tutor them and get them
Yeah.
through the program? And once they're done and they got the basic certification, okay, here's what you need to do. So I
Right.
think sometimes culturally, we have to make changes in our organizations, cultural changes, so that people can get through these initial stages. Because, as you know, you're in a volunteer department as long as I am, and sometimes I have the deepest respect for all the folks, the people that came before us. But sometimes when you hear it all the time. Oh, when I joined, I had to do all this and I had to do that, right? But
Yeah.
times are different. Times are
Yep.
different now, so I think we have to look at things a little differently.
I said that a couple times on previous shows. Matter of fact, I was just thinking about this. I have a short-term memory, I guess, because I spent the first 3 shows this year or 4 shows this year on my podcast talking about R&R recruitment and retention. And one of the things I really focused on is, in my opinion, one of the attributes of a professional operation, a professional fire department, is the willingness to sometimes step back and say, how can we change? How can we make things better? And understanding that, hey, this isn't the 70s or 80s or 90s anymore. It doesn't mean those were bad times. They were great times, but we still got to change. Just went through it in my department, chief. I've talked about it on the show. I've had some people reach out to me to ask how it's going. We started a duty shift program where members now for those that are hearing it again, it's worth reviewing it just to reiterate. For 100 years in my department, when you joined, you had to make 25% of the calls every month. Starting January 1st this year, January 1st, 2022, we opened a new membership category up, duty staffing, where instead of saying I'm going to do 25% of the calls, I'm going to give you so many hours a month. We established a minimum hour threshold. They come to the firehouse and staff the firehouse at what time that's convenient for them. Now they got to meet a minimum number of hours,
Right.
but they're at the firehouse staffing it, and they've still got to get their training in and things like that. But it's just another membership category that we're trying to say it's great for a single parent. It's great for when a spouse is working an opposite shift. It's great for some people that live maybe out of the immediate area that want to come in and volunteer some time with us. It's early. We're up to 15 new members since January 1st for this program. It's still a little early, but the results so far are very promising. And I'm proud of us for at least trying something different.
Sure, I agree.
So,
Yeah, we had a similar program we started back in 2007. We called it a duty crew program, and it worked out well right in the beginning. Members they had to give us 10 hours a week, and then over time, it's kind of got watered down. And you know how it goes. As chiefs change, as leadership changes, policies change, right? So, but we're trying to, the current chief in our place is trying to reinvigorate it and trying to get it back up and running to what we had. And it kind of worked pretty well. And most importantly, like you say, your staff in the firehouse, the apparatus is getting out. That first apparatus is getting out immediately, right?
Can't beat that.
That's correct. And when you have a legitimate, serious emergency or working fire, to get that apparatus there in a quick period of time, get that first hose line stretched. I mean, it goes a long way into being successful and really doing the best work that you can. So, yeah, I agree with you. Cultural change. Change is just that dirty word that we don't like in the fire service.
Right. Well,
career or volunteer.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been through it in the city. We many times we had to change policy on this or that, and it's always a difficult, especially when you're dealing with 15,000 uniforms.
Think there's a few opinions there?
Yeah, and then dealing with unions. The unions are always, and you have to have relationships with the labor unions in order to try and be successful.
Well, Chief Brunacini said it best. Firefighters hate two things: change and the way things are. So
that's right. That's right.
So I wanted to tell me a little bit about, you mentioned your father getting in the volunteer fire service. Is that what sparked your interest? Because I saw a quote too. I read up on you, Chief, and one of the quotes I think you said is you were more interested in baseball.
I was in high school, and I was playing ball, and that was my main interest at the time. As a young kid, 14, 15, 16 years old. And I started to hang around the firehouse a little bit with my dad when I was probably about a junior in high school. And my youngest brother, he would be with my father all the time. He was with my father. He used to go on the calls with my father like crazy. Like, he was all in, and he never joined the fire department. He never got into it. But then, when I started to go down there and I started to have an interest in it, he introduced me to some folks that were New York City firefighters. And I've talked about this a lot in some of the lectures I've done and some of the other podcasts that I've done. And, he introduced me a couple of guys, and one guy's name was John Vigiano.
Legend.
John, right? And John was a volunteer. He joined the volunteers to actually hone his EMT skills. There was a period of time back in the 70s where a lot of city firefighters would go get EMT certification because we didn't do medical work back then. You would go to responses, and, firefighters were not trained to do medical work. The health and hospitals had the EMS work in New York City. But firefighters would respond because people would pull the box. The apparatus would show up, and then, you have people on the street had a car accident or a shooting or a stabbing or just somebody got hurt. And firefighters wanted to have some training. So Vigiano got his EMT, and he joined the volunteer fire department to start to ride the ambulance. But of course, he got into the firefighting end of it. And him and my dad hit it off because they were both Marines. And then there was another guy, his name was Larry Canillo. Larry Canillo was a firefighter in Engine Company 82 in the South Bronx. So remember, Dennis Smith's first book was Report from Engine Company 82. Well, this guy, Larry Canillo, was in 82 engines back in the day when Dennis Smith. And so, these guys were seasoned firefighters, and they joined the volunteers to serve their community, to pass on information. And I got to know those guys a little bit, and I went to ride with Vigiano a couple of times. He was a lieutenant in Rescue Company 2. And, busy company, going to fires all over Brooklyn. And my neighbor across the street was a city firefighter in East New York, Brooklyn. My neighbor next door was a retired city firefighter. So I started to pique, it started to pique my interest. And then when I went to work with my neighbor a couple of times with John Vigiano, I was like, this is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
I think I might want to do this. So when I graduated high school, the New York City firefighter exam was a few months after I graduated. So I took the test and I was on the list. And then I joined the volunteers shortly thereafter. And then I was just waiting to get hired. And I got hired. You got to be 21 to get on the job. And I got hired the month after my 21st birthday. So
Wow.
it was like the jackpot. And
21 years of age, getting on the FDNY. Oh,
21 years old, man. I was 6 weeks old, into my 21st birthday. And wow, it was quite a surprise at the time, but I was so excited. And then it just took off from there, man. I loved it. My dad loved being a volunteer, and I loved being a volunteer. I was in the volunteers like 3.5 years before I got called for New York City, and it all worked out. It all worked out.
that's amazing. I know you said too in the early days of the FDNY, you met a lot of people that had an incredible influence on you. I think you said you were surrounded by greatness. If you wouldn't mind, just talk about some of those people. I know you talk about your first captain, Ed Higgins,
Yeah.
but you also worked with the greats. Like you ended up working with. Did you work with Vigiano and Pete Gansey, Ray Downey, Dennis Cross, right? All those great, great legendary names.
These guys were giants. You've heard the name John Norman too. John
Oh,
Norman writes a
absolutely.
lot of books. So John Norman recently wrote a book, Working with Giants.
Right.
I don't know if you got to read it. I'm about three-quarters of the way through it. But I literally worked with so many giants. I can't even name them all, but you named a few. And these were the folks that had a profound impact on me early in my career. You know what I mean? As a firefighter, as a new officer, and as a new chief officer. So, Higgins was my first captain. And he was a quintessential engine company officer.
What did he do to set you like he obviously started you out in the right direction and made an impact. So for anyone listening out there that might be in a role like that, an influential role, what did he do that made such a good positive impact on you?
So when you came to Ed Higgins' company, it was Engine Company 227 in Brownsville, Brooklyn. At the time that I got in the job, from like 1978 for the next several years, the fire department hired a lot of young new firefighters. And so we had a pretty good influx of new people into that company, as well as all the other companies around us. And when you came into the company, he just had a way of imposing his professional attitude and his professional expectations of you. Like we were all young kids. It was like working with your dad. And, I'm 21 years old. I'm going to a firehouse working with a guy that's probably my dad's age, who also had 5 sons and a daughter. 4 of his sons became New York City firefighters
Oh,
as well.
legendary family, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I knew all of them, and I worked with one of them when I was in rescue. So he was unfortunately killed on 9/11, Timmy Higgins, but one of the greatest firefighters I ever worked with as well. But he just instilled excellence. Like he demanded excellence. He demanded professionalism. He demanded you to basically just do your job. So in New York City, every firefighter working in a company on a tour has a job, right? In an engine, we got the nozzle firefighter, the backup firefighter, and back in those days, we had 5 firefighters. Somebody was the chauffeur, driver. Then you had nozzle, backup. You had the door firefighter and the control firefighter. So there were 4 people on the hose line. The nozzle and the backup, of course, you guys right up front, one behind the other, and you're basically moving the line in and extinguishing the fire. The door firefighter would be at the door, the entrance door to the occupancy, to the apartment, and basically feeding the hose line in. The control firefighter had a job to do, make sure there was enough hose in the stretch, make sure that you could reach the fire. And once you've completed that job, you came up with the door firefighter, and the 2 of you would stay at the door to the apartment or the building and relieve the guys on the inside, the nozzle and the backup, if they had to be relieved. But your job was to feed hose, just continue feeding hose. if you didn't do your job, whatever job it was, Captain Ed Higgins, among all the officers that I worked with there, they were just total professionals. And you heard, if you didn't do your job, you heard about it. And not only that, the senior firefighters there that I worked with, most of them were military veterans, Vietnam guys, some Korean War guys, and just total professionals. When you talk about professionalism, these guys were no nonsense. We had a lot of fun. Let's not kid us. We had a lot of fun at work. But when it was time to go to work, everybody, the captain set the expectations. He demanded that you do your job properly, and he held you accountable. And that's a big thing, holding people accountable when they don't do the right thing. You don't have to yell at people. And he didn't. I never saw the guy yell. But he would pull you aside, or a senior firefighter pull you aside and say, "Hey, what happened?" And it was a teaching moment, right? You just don't watch people like that. I watched a guy like that when I was a young firefighter. He was the calmest person probably ever met on the fire floor. It could be total chaos, and this guy was as calm. I can remember him to this day going into many fires, and you had the nozzle, and he'd say, "Okay, Tommy, can of corn, can of corn." That was his thing. Like he just kind of talked you through it. But he had a way about him, and he was just a wonderful person. He was a dad, and he was a good coach. He was a really good coach and mentor, and he was a good leader. He ran a good company. He ran a good company.
And he certainly had an influence on you. You certainly talk about him so fondly today. So, you were truly surrounded by excellence or giants, right?
I'm not kidding, man.
I like to have. There's a famous proverb that I'm a big history buff. I teach a lot of fire service history, and one of the lines I love to say is, as long as we speak their names, they're never truly gone. So for anyone that had an influence that maybe is no longer with us, we talk about them, and they're not gone. They're still influencing people today. That's so important.
History is very important, and new people coming into this business, they need to know the history of the business. They need to know the history of the departments. It's so important, like that they understand. Sometimes the history, there's lessons learned. Like when you learn history, you make the young men and women that come into your organization know the history of the department. It'll benefit them. They may not know it then, but they'll think about it later down the road, and they'll understand why it's so important to understand those that came before you and who built, the organization before you. Like, what did it come from? How did it evolve to where it is today? Like, right? I think that's important.
Yeah, it definitely is important, and I think we need to talk about that more often, and even make it part of probationary training. Just so we get understand. I like to say they should take people down the hallway. There's always black and white photos and old photos and photos of previous chiefs and presidents. Or I think probies should understand who these people are, and they should get a little talking to about it, because they stand on their shoulders.
And one of the last probationary firefighter ceremonies, graduations that I presided over when I was chief of department, it was the first one that I think I did this, and I think it was the last one I presided over. I said, I gotta try and figure a way to make them understand the importance of history, the history of the New York City Fire Department. Started in 1865, where we've come in 157 years, So I brought with me to the graduation a copy of our 150th anniversary book. And so when I was talking to the kids and their families, I said, I have some homework for you when you go to the firehouse in the next few days. And I took it out and I held it up. And I says, I want you to go to the firehouse, and I want you to find this book. It's the captain, where you can find a copy of the history, 150th anniversary book, because it had so many great stories in it about the job. And it was, I felt pretty passionate about it. And in fact, after the ceremony, the guys that work in our press office said, "You just created a monster." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "We're going to have to reissue that book probably, because, some firehouses, they might not be able to find it.
You're going to have to reprint it."
And it was only the 150th anniversary was only 2015. So it was only 7 years ago. But I but it worked out really good because what they did was they republished the book and they put a new cover letter in it for the Chief of Department. And now the kids had a little message, to go out and learn the history of the job. Right? I think that was important.
Yeah, it's just so important, and I'm glad you said that because I think it's important that our listeners understand that and get members in their organization to understand that. Folks, we truly stand on the shoulders of those who came before, and the stories are incredible. The exploits are incredible, and doesn't mean it's a boring history lesson from yesterday and everything, we can't change. No, it's just appreciating what they did and where they brought you to, and in some cases, appreciating their sacrifice, and also, like you said, Chief, learning from some of these lessons. I mean, Vinny Dunn says it all the time, the truss roof failures. And if we just learn from some of these tragedies, we might be able to prevent a future tragedy, right? I mean, we know the Hackensack truss roof failure, but what happened 10 years before that? Wall bombs. What happened 10 years before that? Yingling Chevrolet in Kansas. And it's important to understand these histories so tragedy doesn't repeat itself, if nothing else.
I think it's part of professional development. I really believe that. It's part of professional development. And the other thing about history, particularly in the volunteer system, like think about your local volunteer fire department. At least where I come from, the fire department was the center of the community years ago. Everything that happened in communities centered around the fire department. They did all the fairs and the fundraisers,
Mm-hmm.
The parades.
Yeah, picnics, field day, parades, pancake breakfast.
Everything centered around the fire company or the fire department, right? Things have changed a bit, but I think people, if they understand that and they know the history on how important that organization was or is to the community, right? I think that is where you kind of start to really develop more of the passion for the business. Like I know that's at least how I look at it.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I like to say too, I love to tell parents out there, where else would you rather have a young son or daughter on a Friday or Saturday night hanging out at the firehouse, surrounded hopefully by very good role models and giving them sage advice for as they go through life. So yeah, so much good that comes out of the volunteer fire service. It needs to be celebrated more often. I wanted to delve a little bit into, you have some great leadership advice, Chief. But first of all, you also said you had a favorite rank. Out of all the ranks you held, which is pretty much every one, I believe you thought, was captain your favorite rank, and why is that?
Yeah, I tell people all the time that captain was my favorite rank going through New York City Fire Department, even in the volunteers. Is when you're the captain, you are the leader of that company or that unit, right? You own it. In New York City, there's one captain and 3 lieutenants in every company. And the captain is the one that sets the expectations, sets the tone, and rallies folks around the mission, right? And keeping them focused on the mission. So the captain's job is so important. And so as we go through society is a little difficult at times today, right? Trying to work through some of the things that we're going through, with politics and all this other stuff that's going on. If you have strong leadership, right, and everybody knows the expectations, everybody knows how they're expected to behave, and that comes from the captain, the company commander. And I'll also tell people there's a difference between captain and company commander. Company commander is the role that you need to aspire to. If you're going to get a unit, be assigned there for a while, get elected to in a volunteer fire company, you are the leader. People are going to look up to you. The officers are going to look up to you, and they're going to be looking for direction. So I spent 7 years as a captain. I spent almost 15 years as a battalion chief, and I loved that rank. That was fun. I love being a chief because you have an influence on a lot more people. But in a fire company in New York City, the captain has 3 lieutenants and 20 to 25 firefighters, and you have a significant impact on their development. And it really, I enjoyed the hell out of it. I really
Yeah.
did. I really did. It was fun, and it made me a better person. And I think it really prepared me for the future, like when I moved up the ranks a little bit more.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about that, moving up through the ranks and some of the leadership things that you've picked up along the way, because leadership is always talked about. It's
Yeah.
a subject that applies to everything, whether it's the fire service, a volunteer's job, outside the fire service. I always said my wife was the PTA president, for Pete's sake. She want to talk politics, or
Yeah,
a
sure.
Girl Scout leader, anything, politics
Yeah,
is everywhere.
it is.
And being that you were a chief in both the career and volunteer side, did you have to approach it differently, leading volunteers versus leading your paid people? And if you did, what can you tell some of the volunteer leaders out there that maybe would make their job just a little easier to navigate?
So you said one word, you said the word politics, right?
Yes.
So my view on politics is no matter what we do in the fire service, career or volunteer, politics will always play a part. Politics is about people. If you look up the dictionary definition of politics, it's about people. It's about people and groups of people being able to come together and work towards a common goal. But here's the thing. Sometimes I've felt over the years that some people will compromise their principles for political purposes. I think you can be a really good politician and not have to compromise your principles. That's kind of what I tried to do. I tried to make sure that when you're dealing with people, when you're a career fire chief or a volunteer fire chief, you have to deal with the community, right? You have to deal with the people that are in your response area. You have to deal with politicians. You have to deal with other community leaders. You can work with people. You don't have to agree with them on everything, but you got to be able to work with them. And not only does it create a good reputation for your organization, it shows an example for your people that, listen, I don't agree with everything this person says or does, but for the betterment of the organization, for the greater good of the community, we got to get along. And in the volunteer system, internally in the firehouse, right? A lot of people, you get elected to officer positions, chief officer positions. Most places you have to have some kind of qualifications to be able to run for those positions, but people play politics, right? They play politics and they compromise their principles, right? They say things that they know they don't believe themselves, but just to get votes, like right in the volunteer organization. So what I would say to the volunteer leaders is that, I'll repeat it, you can be a good politician and not compromise your principles. It takes work. I'm not going to lie. It takes a little bit of work, and you got to navigate. You got to get to know the crowd. You got to know who you're dealing with too, right?
Well, you just said it. You got to get to know your people.
100%. So that's like a big deal to me as far as a leadership trait. When you're in the volunteer department, it's probably a little easier to get to know your people, right? You live in the community with these folks, right? You may know a lot of them from all the years you're in this community. Kids might have grown up together. But I tell people all the time, you got to get to know the folks that work for you. Know their names if you can. Know something about their families. Know who they are, like where they come from. Like you got to know them in order to be able to communicate with them effectively, right? If you know it, it goes such a long way. When you know somebody's name and you know a little bit about their background, and you remember that person will say, "Wow, that guy, he's amazing, man.
100%.
Isn't it right?
100%.
It's absolutely true. I think that's a life lesson.
It is. It is. I know I know an officer. I took a class. It was either at FDIC or one of the conferences where one of the officers talking about leadership. He admitted it. He had a horrible memory. He put in his phone the names of the children of his crew so he could remember their names. And then when he was talking to the crew members, he could bring their names up and establish that relationship. And when they would come back from vacation, he would ask how their vacation was, or if one of them was on travel hockey or baseball or whatever, how's it going? How's the team doing? You would build that rapport, establish a relationship, and it doesn't have to be fake. It should be genuine,
That's exactly
because
right.
these people are working for you, even in the volunteer side.
That's right. And somebody's sick in the family, kid sick, somebody's sick, show that you care.
Right.
That you care about them because they're of value to you and your unit or your department, right? So that's a big deal. And I honestly believe that that's a critical retention tool. I believe that. I believe that's a part of the retention problem is that sometimes we don't get personal enough. We don't know.
Right.
We don't show them that we really care about them. Like in a large organization like the New York City Fire Department, it's very hard, of course, to get to know everybody, right?
Right.
At least when you do deal with people, like when I went to go out and visit firehouses, I always tried to, impress upon folks that, listen, man, I'm a firefighter just like you. You got to have a little humility. Humility goes a long way too in this business, especially when you're in a leadership role. If you're humble and you show people that you're humble, they'll be more inclined to listen to you, and when you ask them their first name, hey, what's your first name? You want to know, like, that's showing, like, I want to get to know you a little bit more.
Right.
And so little things, like those little things that make a difference, I think are important. I'll tell you, I learned a lot from a lot of the guys. One thing that I learned from John Vigiano that he did, and I thought, wow, when he did it for me, what a tremendous communication tool to let people know that you care. Whenever I would get promoted or I would get a new assignment in the job, in New York City, we have what they call department orders. So when somebody gets promoted or you get a transfer, it's on a department order. And John Vigiano used to make a copy of the department order and he would write a personal note on it. Tom, glad you got the assignment. Well deserved. John. And he would send it to you in an envelope in the fire department mail. Well, when you got promoted, so glad you got promoted. I'm so proud, that kind of thing. And
the personal touch.
I'm telling you, I started to do it myself. And when I started to do it, I said, people would be beyond thankful.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe you took the time to do that, Chief.
I believe that. Yeah.
And when I became chief of department, I made a point of visiting firehouses a lot.
I was going to ask you about that, and that they loved you for that, right? You were here you are the chief of department, and you would go into the firehouses, and what was it, on Fridays or whenever you could go in there? Let's talk about that a little bit.
And I was only chief of department for about 7 months, promoted to chief of department, and I was acting for 2 or 3 months before that. But I made a point. I said, I want to be out in the field. I want to hear from the folks. I want to let them know that I'm who I am and whatever. So I would go to firehouses and EMS stations every Friday. And I made a point after every visit, I would write a handwritten note thanking them for their time, appreciate all that you do. And I would just put it in the envelope and I would address it to the company commander and send it. And so many times, people would send me pictures on my phone of the note hanging on the bulletin board in the firehouse. And when I would go around, like, people would say, that meant a lot to them. Little things, little things.
Yeah.
But I learned it from others, it wasn't something, wasn't new to me, but it was just a little thing to let the troops know that you care. In the volunteer fire department, one of the things that we tried to do, I always felt like communication is such a big deal, particularly in volunteer department, right? How many times have you heard in the firehouse, when people don't show up for something and people would say, I didn't know. I didn't know.
All the time.
So now in today's world, you have texts, you have emails, you have
more ways than ever.
There's more ways to communicate now than ever. But something that we did the second time I was chief in the volunteers, because I learned a lot the first time I did it. 10 years later, I did it again. And I used to put out a weekly message to the department on a phone system. You'd send out like a blast, almost like the calling post thing now that they have today. You could blast out a message on the phone. We put out a weekly message on everything that was going on for the week. If anybody was sick or their family members were sick, you want to give them a shout, and those little personal things, just to let people know that we're trying to keep in touch. We're trying to let you understand that we all have to be in this together. That we all gotta work together here. So those little things make such a big difference, man. They really do. They really do. Even in a large organization, they really do.
Oh, absolutely. You can't communicate enough. And when you do communicate clearly and with transparency, it helps cut down on rumors and,
100%.
yeah. So and you're right. There's so many ways to do it today. Yet, I think I read a stat once that it's still one of the biggest criticism the average individual has with people above them or the organization they belong to is lack of communication.
When you go higher in an organization, it's natural to get overwhelmed and to kind of get sucked into your job. But if you want to be successful in leading an organization, big or small, you got to let the troops know what's going on, cut down on a rumor mill, right?
Yeah.
This whole Zoom thing, the thing we're doing right now, we were able to use this format to communicate with the on-duty troops in the New York City Fire Department during the COVID pandemic. And then we kind of kept it up afterwards. Anytime we had important information to share, my executive officer could set up a Zoom and I could meet with, I think I did, I used to do it by borough. I could get on Zoom real time with the folks sitting in the firehouse kitchen. If they weren't going on a run, they were sitting there listening to the chief of the fire department or the chief of operations. I started doing it then, and they could hear from me, rather than in a memo or an email,
right?
Or, some other kind of notice, right? And that was really cool, because I'm not a technology guy, and that was a really, really effective communication tool during the pandemic, during some of the civil unrest that we had back in 2020. And I said to the guys that came after me, I says, if you can continue to use this tool, the people in the field want to hear from us. They want to see us. They want to know what's going on. And it worked out very, very well.
Chief, I got to ask you, when you visited a firehouse, did you catch a couple runs? Did you go on a couple runs?
Yeah, I did. So what I would do in the morning on Fridays, I would go to an EMS station. In New York City, we have the Bureau of Fire Operations, the Bureau of EMS Operations. So I was an EMT for a long time out in Long Island in my volunteer department, but I never worked in EMS in the city. My son's an EMT in FDNY. He's out there now for about 3.5 years. But I didn't know enough about our EMS folks. I really didn't. I was embarrassed to say that, to be honest, particularly as one of the top leaders in the department. But I said, you know what? I got to get out there and understand more about their job, right? So I went to an EMS station in the morning. I used to bring a piece of cake, sit around with the troops before they went out on the street, and then I jumped on an ambulance. I used to go ride with a couple of kids and taking a few runs, talk to them, and kind of ask them to teach me about your job, because I didn't know enough about it. And they were great. They were such good people, right? And then in the afternoon, I would go to a firehouse on the same day on a Friday, and I'd have lunch with the firefighters. And then I would, if I could, I would take in some runs with them. I'd jump on a rig.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, this is the best story of all. Right? So I'm working I'm riding with a company one day, and we get a run, and I was able to get on a rig, and we're going to it, and it was for a structural fire response. And the young man sitting across from me was a young, just coming off probation firefighter. And he had been a former Marine, tough kid, young, and he had the nozzle position that day. So I was kidding around with him as we were responding. I said, listen, you know how this works. He says, what? I says, when we get there, you stretch the line to the door and you just give it to me. So he looks at me and he says, Chief, that's not happening. But that's what I wanted to hear, right? That's awesome. That is the attitude that I want to hear, man. Right? So it was inspiring to me to go out there and talk to these kids.
Yeah.
I miss riding on fire trucks, of course, but it was a really good experience, and I did it as much as I could through the tenure that I was chief of department, and I think it made a difference, particularly with the EMS people, because they couldn't believe it. The chief of the fire department's coming out riding on an ambulance. I says, yeah, why not? You know, it was cool. It was good. It was good to get out of the office, number one. Number two, it was just good to let them know that I really wanted to know about their job, and that I really cared about each and every one of them. So that made a big difference, I
I
think.
bet it did. Did any of their hands shake when they started an IV with the chief of department looking
Yeah,
over
yeah,
this?
yeah. They were so good, man. They were so professional.
There's,
They
yeah,
really just did their job. You
did
know what
their
I mean? I
job.
would just stand back and watch them, and that's the best part of being a leader in the organization was, even as a volunteer chief, when you
Yeah.
stand behind the scenes, sometimes you watch your people working, and you're like, wow,
You
this
know
is
what
good
one
stuff.
thing I say, you just made me think of something I like to point out and sometimes when I'm out teaching or presenting is you want to talk professionalism. I always say watch FDNY videos. As you know, they're all over the internet. There's
Mhm.
entire channels devoted to on YouTube to
Mhm.
FDNY. Whenever they have a fire, and I mean you're in Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, there's so many people watching and or going about their business. They don't even a lot of times watch the fire, right? The
Yeah,
civilians, and
sure.
they're always getting in the way of the firefighters,
Yeah,
but they never stop to get in these people's faces. They
yeah,
concentrate on the job they got to
yeah,
do. They
right,
step around them and
yeah.
they just are so professional and go about their job.
As you know, this whole new world of social media sometimes can be detrimental to us as well, right? But I would say that we had situations too where people made us aware in headquarters of maybe folks that weren't being as professional once in a while and doing silly things that were unprofessional. And to tell you the truth, when it came to our attention, we used it to teach some lessons, if you will. Like when we saw
Right.
somebody, we had a situation one time. A guy sends me a video. A guy pretty well known in the fire service sends me a video. Hey Tommy, did you see this? I'm like, I'm not a big social media guy, but I looked at it and I was like, what? So we had a couple of firefighters somewhere in the city. They go to a car fire in the middle of the night, and it was embarrassing actually. One firefighter, the guy with the nozzle, had full set of gear. It was a probationary firefighter. He had all his gear on, his SCBA, the whole thing. The firefighter that was the backup firefighter was wearing a pair of shorts and sneakers, and he was backing this young kid up, and the officer was standing there with shorts. And I was like, what? So totally unprofessional. So what we did, I used it. I said, I got to use this as maybe a lesson. I called that officer down with his captain, with his chief, and we had a little chat in my office. And I said, you see what you did there? I showed him the video, and I said, that probationary firefighter that you were working with that day, those kids are very impressionable. What you did that day was unacceptable, like, right? So we took the officer offline for a little while, and we had him doing drills in his local area on the proper use of PPE, and they got the message. We
Yeah.
got to do that. We got to do that once or twice, and everybody knows that you're not screwing around. Like
Right.
we got to be professional every time we go out the door.
And even the way you handled that was so professional.
Yeah,
It really was.
I was never one to yell and scream to begin with, but when some people flip out when they see things like that, I'm like, all right, we'll deal with it.
We'll deal
And,
with it.
the message got out, the word got out. All right, you're gonna get called on it if you screw it up. So everybody's watching on this social media stuff. Like you said, people are taking cell phone videos all the time, and that's how we get in trouble sometimes. But you got to use it to try and teach people lessons sometimes, and so that they become better.
Right.
You want to make them better. You don't want to kill them like with the suspension and all that other
Right.
stuff. Like, right. Sometimes,
Yeah.
listen. Sometimes people do really dumb things, and you have no choice to do a little more serious discipline. But most of the time, you can handle it where you can make it a positive discipline. If
Yeah.
you right.
Yeah. Everything you've talked about so far with leadership comes down to humility and being humble and not having an ego leaders out there, right? Yes, you've got the trumpets that you wear, but You got to get down on the ground level. And I read once, I have a note somewhere that, leadership is in the fire service, it's 5% leading on the fire ground and 95% leading in the firehouse. And
That's right.
and then it's about building relationships more than sometimes than battling fires. Matter of fact, Bill Guston said it best.
Mhm.
Bill Guston,
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I was in his class once, and he said it's like before you're an officer, it's like you're going to the beach with your buddies, but after you become an officer, it's
Mhm.
like you're going to the beach with your family. You think you're going to act
Yeah.
differently. So
That's right.
I thought that was great.
I would say all the time, like I wrote an article in Size Up magazine, New York State Chiefs,
Yeah.
a year or two ago, and about leadership and command philosophy, and I had a list of things, in the station, on the fire ground, and the list was much bigger in the station on how to lead. You know what I mean? Because on
Hmm.
the fire ground, we're going to work here. Like, we got to,
Right.
but there's still some things on the fire ground that a senior leader, a fire chief, and a senior officer, you need to let your people do their job. You need to not micromanage. You need to let them, they're going to make mistakes. We learn from mistakes as long as nobody's getting seriously injured or killed, of course. Let them make mistakes and let them learn from their mistakes, right? But
Mhm.
don't beat them over the head like when they screw up.
And don't you think part of being a good leader too is sizing yourself up more than in the fire service, we do such a good job of sizing things up, right? We size up fires and motor vehicle accidents. We certainly size up each other. But I think you said it too, that you believe critical self-assessment is a key part of the leadership process. Look in the mirror. Are
That's
you
right.
getting the results you want? Are people behaving the way I mean, right? It's just so important.
The word I use is be introspective. You got to be seriously very introspective because as you're going through these leadership roles, up to the day I left the department in the city, um, you learn something every day from somebody. And like we never have it, like right. So you got to always look at yourself and say, what did I learn from this experience today? What did I learn from this experience we went through the last few weeks? Like when we went through the pandemic, when we went through the civil unrest, when we went through when the city imposed the vaccine mandate.
Right.
I learned a lot about myself through that time period. I really did. And that's how you become better. You just
Yeah.
become better when you're introspective and you do self-assessment, right? And sometimes a lot of leaders don't do that enough because you said the key word before, because of the egos, right?
Right.
But
Right.
in order to be good at what we do, we really do have to look at ourselves and understand when we make mistakes, you got to own it, man. You got to say, hey, I didn't get everything right on this one, but I learned from it. And sometimes you got to say you're sorry, right? And another thing you got to do a lot that I tell people all the time, and it's so simple. When people do good work for you, say thank you. Simple. If you let them know that I really appreciate what you did, that goes such a long way too, right?
Sure does. Yes.
I don't think we do that enough as leaders. Sometimes we don't say thank you enough, and a lot of leaders are quick to take credit for things that really they didn't do. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
Praise
give,
down, right?
give credit where credit is due. Like, right? Give
Right.
credit where credit. Hey, that was his idea or her idea. We just kind of implemented it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We took it
Yeah.
and we ran with it. So,
Solid advice.
yeah,
Solid advice.
100%.
Yeah, I just like to remind the listeners real quick that they're listening to Fire Engineering Talk Radio and the installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. Tom Merrill here. So glad to have you listening in. And again, we're talking with the recently retired Chief of Department from the FDNY, but also a longtime volunteer firefighter, past Chief of Department, current Fire Commissioner Thomas Richardson. And talking a lot about a lot of different topics. And I want to continue on the leadership topic for just a few more minutes, Chief, if we can, because you have a lot to say about what you term command presence. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. Leader's intent was another big thing that you talk about, right? You have a lot to say about that. What do you mean by leader's intent in developing command presence? I want to talk about those two things.
So I'm going to talk about command presence first
Okay.
because I would argue that you can learn it, in my opinion, you learn it from seeing it, from watching it. And that's
You
what
know it when you see it.
you know it when you see it. When you know, that's right. And I'll give you the best example of command presence for me was a guy named Ray Downey. Now, Ray Downey was my captain when I was a firefighter in Rescue 2 years ago, and he was killed on 9/11. Just a kind of a visionary kind of guy.
And if anybody doesn't know who Ray Downey is, if any of our listeners don't know who Ray Downey was, Google his name after this podcast.
Yeah.
That's your homework assignment for tonight.
Yeah, so on 9/11, he was the Chief of Special Operations Command, but he was my captain when I was a young firefighter in Rescue 2. And I would watch Ray Downey. And I was on a podcast recently, and somebody asked me to describe Ray Downey. And I described Ray Downey with those words. I says, Ray Downey was command presence. That's what Ray Downey was. So I watched a guy like him, among others, many others, but he kind of personified it for me in my career. And it was somebody who could take charge, but do it with humility, would do it and just execute, like without pounding his chest, just do the job, leave the job, pass it on, and let's go to the next job. Like, right. And that was on the fire ground, but in the firehouse too. He was a solid company commander. I talked about the difference between captain and company commander before. And in the firehouse, he had a command presence. You had just the utmost respect for this guy, like, just the way he handled himself, the way he spoke to you, and sometimes the way he just looked at you, like, right? People can look at you sometimes and all right, I got it, if you were going down the wrong path or whatever. But when we talk about command presence, at least from my perspective, over the course of my career, somebody with command presence is somebody that is, I often term a lot of the people that have a really good command presence as sometimes they're quiet professionals. Like, these are people that, like you said before, you just see. You could go to a major incident, or you could be in a really tough situation administratively, or in the firehouse, or in a meeting, and you could watch them, and they're just quiet professionals. They don't have to say a lot of words. They don't have to say a lot, but they get the message across in such a way that you understand exactly where they're coming from. And I worked with a lot of people like that, but Ray Downey was the guy that I learned a lot about that, and he really had a significant impact on my career as I moved forward past the rank of captain. And I think a lot of lessons I learned from him, in the podcast I did, I called them the Downey lessons, like quiet Downey lessons. And it was about command presence. It was about being able to portray command, portray leadership, display leadership, but do it humbly, do it quietly, and communicate it in a way that people could get it. So that's kind of what it means to me. Like, that's how I kind of describe it.
Calm and in control.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And then leader's intent. I know my dad was in the Marine Corps. He was a grunt. Like, my dad was a sergeant in the Korean War. He was in combat and all of that. But I talked to a lot of military folks, and then I know a lot of fire service leaders as well. And whether you're leading a fire department, whether you're leading a major corporation, whether you're leading a fire company or a fire unit, an engine company or a ladder company, if you're the leader of that group, the large group or the smaller group, when you impose the expectations, what you want your people to, how you want them to operate, how you want them to carry themselves on a day-to-day basis, that larger leader's intent. I argue that if you do a good job of training them and mentoring them, all you got to do is give them the intent and let them go. Like at the basic level in the fire service, volunteer or career, if you have a well-trained unit and you're the leader and you did a really good job, when you go to a fire and emergency, you shouldn't have to bark out a lot of orders. Stretch a line. That's all you should have to say. They should be able to stretch a line and get it done. Fellas, this is what we're going to do. And boom, let them go do it. I think the opposite of giving leaders intent is micromanaging. We don't want to micromanage people like in this business, whether it's large or small. When it comes to a large organization and the leader's intent, I think a lot of that has to do with letting them know how important the mission is, focusing on the mission. There's a book that I talk about all the time when I speak to groups, particularly when I talk on leadership. And it's one of my favorite books, and it was called The Mission, the Men, and Me. I don't know if you've ever read it.
On the bookshelf right behind me, Chief.
One of the best books I've ever read from a mission perspective, and that was written by a Delta Force commander in Afghanistan. But so many lessons in that book, so many lessons in that book. So leaders' intent from the larger or macro view to me is about the mission, making sure people understand the mission. Like when we went through the pandemic in the city, when they instituted the vaccine mandate, all I needed to do was tell my senior leaders, I said, listen, we all have opinions, particularly with the vaccine mandate. We knew we were going to be coming into a very difficult situation with our membership. I don't care what your opinion is. It doesn't matter. We're here to do a job. We have to run the New York City Fire Department. So forget your opinion. I don't want to hear politics. I don't care. The mission is making sure that those fire apparatus and those ambulances are going out the door every day, taking care of business, right? So that's all I needed to say. Everybody got the message, and that's what they portrayed down the line. And we went through a very difficult period of time for about a week. We had a significant medical leave problem, but it kind of straightened itself out after a week because people understood the mission. And that came from the top of the department, all of the people I worked with, from the commissioner on down. We got to focus on the mission here. So leaders' intent has a lot to do with understanding the mission. If you give them the mission, whatever it is, and you make them understand that you have holding them to a high standard, because with the mission that we do in the fire service and the EMS service, there is no greater mission, man. We're taking care of people. So that's the importance of the leader's intent, portraying that message and giving it clearly, but then letting them do their job, like making sure you train them well enough so that they can do their job without you having to micromanage it.
And there's so much good stuff to talk about. I could talk to you forever. I know we've been going an hour and a half now. I just have a couple more things I want to delve into. A big part of what you just said too, I was thinking about leaders' intent and what you were saying. We talked just a few minutes ago about the importance of communication. There it is again, right? Communicate your intent, then reinforce the mission and what the plan is and what you're going to do going forward. And there's that communication word again. Sure. So important. Important.
Yep, it doesn't get any more important. Because if you can't communicate it clearly, it's not going to work.
So I want to get your take on the new kids coming on the job today. I think it was in the WNYF edition. I saw you were asked about it, and you basically said, we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine.
So every generation that comes through this business, or every generation that comes through our lives, we always say, these kids today, you hear it all the time. They said it about your generation. They said it about my generation. Well, you and I are probably in the same generation, but they said it about us. They said it about the group before us. But here's what I find. And I literally live this when I was out there talking to the firefighters, the EMTs, and the paramedics, I would argue today, more than ever, the people coming into our business today are probably more educated than ever. A lot of these kids joining the fire department now, they're all college graduates. They all know how to think. They are problem solving. They have a problem solving mindset. Yes, they ask more questions, but I think that they do that because they're thinkers, like, right? Um, and sometimes it's better to learn from asking questions than telling people, like,
Kind of
questions.
like you did when you visited Firehouse.
Yeah, right. You learned about things. It makes you think about things a little differently. And so I would say that when I say we're going to be fine, I really believe that, because if we teach them right, if we let them understand the history, where we came from, if we make them understand that today, you are the stewards of the next generation, like we are the stewards of our generation. Like, you're the stewards. You're supposed to make it better moving forward. And when you get into this business, the people that get into this business, like, and understand how serious it is and how important it is to society, um, that's a big deal. So I think they're going to be fine. Like, I would say that maybe, from experience, maybe kids don't have some of the mechanical aptitude. My dad taught me how to use tools a little bit, and so when I came into the fire service, I wasn't really mechanically inclined, but I had a half a clue, like, right? Some kids coming in today, they have no mechanical aptitude, because today's generation is different than ours. They're on phones and tablets, and they use their fingers a lot, like, right? But so we got to teach them. Like, that's our job. We got to teach them.
Right.
Anybody can be taught if they want to be taught. John Vigiano said this years ago, and he was 100% right. He used to tell me, you give me a kid with heart and desire, I'll make him into a firefighter. And he's right. If they have it in their heart and they want to learn, when they walk through the door of the local volunteer fire department, or they walk through the door for the first time in their assigned company in the New York City Fire Department or any career department, you put your arm around them, they're yours now. You own them. So if they fail, it's your fault,
Your fault.
in my opinion.
Gotcha.
I believe that.
I'm going to give something away, something I like to talk about in my presentation when we talk about the kids coming on the job today, or the new generation. And we're quick to criticize, us gray-haired people are quick to criticize the fact that maybe they've never mowed a lawn. They don't know how to change oil. Maybe don't know, as Chief Salka said in one of his classes, a Phillips head from a flathead screwdriver.
Yeah.
But you know what can humble us? Go to the restaurant where you have to scan the menu.
Oh, yeah. Forget it.
Right? My 20-something-year-old daughter got so frustrated with me one night, she took the phone out of my hand and scanned the menu and handed it back to me in about 1.2 seconds.
Exactly.
And I fumbled around for 5 minutes.
That's right.
Touche, right? Very humbling. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
Teach them how to be a firefighter. Teach them your history. Tell them your story.
That's right.
Tell them why they should be proud, and then remind them it continues on their watch.
And it's the greatest. Listen, we're biased, of course, but it is really the greatest way to serve, man, is to give back and help people, man. However you do that, but if you get
somebody's darkest hour, you are their light.
You are,
and it might be something very minor that we know it's not life or death, and
right.
We're thinking, well, I left my comfortable home or the firehouse for this, but you're making a difference in somebody's life, even just smiling and being nice to them.
Yeah. And when they experience that, and you make them understand how important that is to that person that they just helped, and they carry that on, I think we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine.
Chief, words of advice. I know you said you delivered a lot of speeches at commencement ceremonies, graduation ceremonies, or maybe even when you stopped in the firehouses and saw that new Proby, or even in the Valley House now back home. Words of advice for those serving today.
So, in particular for young people today, One of the things that guys taught me when I first came into the business was, even when you may know something, but you come into a firehouse, you come into a situation, and somebody says, "Hey, let me show you this. Let me tell you about this." You may know, you may have a clue, you may know that the worst thing you could do to somebody that's trying to help you out is say, "I know that, I got it," because they're never going to help you again. So listen to people. They might have a different perspective. You may know something, but listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. That's number one. You got to treat people, everybody in this business, both the folks that you work with and volunteer with, and the people that you serve. You got to treat everybody with dignity and respect. You know, everybody's not as fortunate, and we come across folks in the line of work that we do that are down on their luck. They're destitute, they may be homeless, or they need help though. So you got to talk to. One of the things I never tolerated, when I was an officer, I would never tolerate people talking to people disrespectfully. I don't care what the background, it didn't matter. Even when they give you, it's hard sometimes. You got to bite your tongue. But everybody deserves to be treated with respect. And people are having a bad day when we're going to their homes, right? They're having a really bad day. So try and help them out. Talk to them respectfully. How can I help you? And once they know that you're going to do that, they're going to open up a little bit for the most part, unless they have a lot of problems, right? And we all have dealt with people like that. But for the most part, treat people with dignity and respect. Treat your coworkers with dignity and respect. And another thing, and I had to learn this the hard way so many times in my career, we all have our own opinions. We believe what we believe. Sometimes you have to listen to people with differing viewpoints. I wish our politicians could learn this today.
Yeah, that's
Listen,
true.
listen to somebody who has a different view than you, because you may learn something. Like, right, you may say, "Wow, I never thought about it this way." Whatever the problem is you're going to try and solve, whether it's politics or not, listen to the other side, listen to the other point of view. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe not right then and there, but maybe you'll reflect on that as you're driving home from work one day and say, "Wow, he was kind of right," And I think that makes you a better person. It makes you a better leader, and a better mentor, I think, moving forward. So listening to an opposite view is important. So those three things that I just said are very simple things. They're not hard to do, right?
Right.
Treat people with dignity and respect. Take people's advice. Don't blow them off. And make sure that you are listening to people that maybe don't think as you do. Right? That's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing, Chief, I know on an email I sent you, if you had time, I'd like to just read this letter real quick that I got from a listener who was looking for some advice. And I thought maybe we could try and answer this listener with the question they had about their hometown volunteer department. So I'll paraphrase the letter. But they said, one question I have to ask is that my department is run pretty old school. I'm part of a small but growing group of members that want to push the department forward and move forward. And many times we get roadblocks. And I'm sure there's many departments out there that can see that in their own department. So he was asking if it's possible for me, and I said, of course, with my guest, to do a show about how members can help move a department forward while respecting what has been done in the past. How to get some of the members that don't want to change to at least try and listen to new ideas. Is there anything you can offer as far as some advice on that? What do you think we tell that individual?
So I think the first thing is that you have to find somebody in that group that can be the leader. Who's the leader in that group? Who's the person that could be the spokesperson for that group? It goes back to what I just said too, about trying to figure out a way to listen to the other side. And one of the things I think that works really well sometimes in group settings is to do almost like, these little town hall, little meetings. Like if you have an initiative that you're trying to push forward, I think sometimes if you get the leadership to open up the floor and say, hey, here's something that we would like to do. This is something that we'd like to change. This is a direction that we'd like to go in. Let's have a civilized, discussion and maybe have some pre-prepared questions and let everybody participate in the conversation and say, hey, this is why we think we should do it. And let's hear from the other side why they don't think we should do
Right.
it. It's kind of listen to both sides in like almost like a town hall kind of setting. And that's not hard to do, right? But I think it takes strong leadership to be able to do that. Like somebody's got to be open-minded enough to say, hey, let's try to get everybody together here.
Yeah, it takes strong leadership. It takes a lot of what you talked about earlier, being humble, having humility, listen to what people are telling you. Doesn't always mean you have to do what they're asking, but at least give them the courtesy of truly listening. Don't just have it in your mind where the answer is no. Listen to what they have to say. Repeat it back to them so it shows them that you understand what they're trying to do, and then have a professional discussion about it. And if you can't do it, one of the favorite lines I have from a good leadership idol I have, Jocko Willink, he's a Navy SEAL, and he always says, explain the why. If you're going to say no, explain the no, why you can't do it. All about respect too.
So there was another book that I read. It was probably one of the most effective or impactful books on me about leadership. It was called It's Your Ship. A guy named Michael Abrashoff.
Yeah, it's another one I have on the shelf behind me. Great book.
It was such an easy read.
Yeah.
This is a guy that took a Navy destroyer and took it from being like the F troop of the fleet to the top of the fleet during the Iraq, Afghanistan years, and such really practical, sensible advice that he gave, the lessons that he transpired or transposed in every chapter of the book. I thought that book was great, and it was about change, changing the culture on his ship, and he turned it around.
Yes, he did.
And, great book.
Great
he wrote
book.
2 books, actually, right? He wrote 2 books. Yeah.
Got it right here, Michael Abrashoff. It's Your Ship.
Yep. Great
loaded with notes. A great book if anybody's interested in. When you get elected or appointed to a leadership position in your volunteer firehouse, you don't stop learning. And great line: leaders are readers. However you want to do it, you gotta figure out what moves and motivates people. Get to know your people, extend them respect. And speaking of respect, Chief, as we wrap things up here, 2 stories that just to me show just what a great leader you were, but also the respect the members had for you. First of all, one of your last tours was a really tragic fire, right? I believe 17 were killed. Wasn't that one of your last tours?
Yes.
And you were so concerned with your firefighters that you went and paid a visit to those frontline firefighters afterwards, which to me says a lot about who you are, but also says a lot about our business, because what did you notice those firefighters were doing? They were cleaning tools and getting ready to go on the next run.
Getting ready to go back in service. They couldn't wait to go back in service. These guys just witnessed a tremendous amount of death, took a physical beating at this fire operation. And then I walked in that firehouse and these guys were getting the rig back together. And I was like, wow, but this is who we are. This is what we do. This is what we expect, right? And I was very, very proud to be their chief.
I bet.
I really was.
And then the respect the members have for you, I think, was demonstrated on one of your last tours. Is it true? I read somewhere, heard somewhere they gave you the can position on Rescue 2. So what's the deal there?
So what I did my last couple of days on the job, I went to all the companies I worked in and had lunch or dinner with the folks. and if I was able to ride, I did. And in Rescue 2 that night, I went and I said, I'd like to have the can position, and they accommodated me. And we didn't have any responses the time I was there for, the first part of the tour, like for 6 or 7 hours. But I was hoping so
Yeah.
bad to go to a fire. I was waiting. And
Yeah.
but yeah, no, it was great. It was a great way to finish my career and just let them know that all of those units had an impact on my life and on my career. And it was something I wanted to do, so it worked out well.
That's fantastic. And a career that's still going on the volunteer side. Still an active
Yeah,
commissioner, right?
my wife, my granddaughter. I have 4 grandchildren, so my granddaughter, the oldest one, is 5, and most recently, she says to me, she calls me Poppy. Poppy, she goes, I think you're fake retired. Goes, you're never home, because I'm involved. I'm involved in the Firehouse local, and I just came back from Columbus, Ohio. I was out at Firehouse Expo, and
Right.
like I said, man, you got to immerse yourself in this stuff. We love it. That's who we are. It's not just something that we do. It's who we are. Like, we're firefighters.
You
We're
climbing on the rig back home in the Valley House too? You're still climbing on the
Yeah,
rig, driving, or
I haven't really ridden much, but I'm very involved on the Board of Fire Commissioners, and I do whatever I can to help those folks. So, but I'm uh, I'm looking forward to continuing to contribute, and hopefully make the fire service better. Both locally and otherwise. So I'm blessed to be a part of it. I'm blessed to to know so many people in this business, and the fire service. And the other day, I don't know if you went on that summit the other day with the United States Fire Administration. They did a summit on fire prevention and control.
right? I saw the link. I did not
Yeah,
get on that
yeah.
one.
So I went on it, and there's 33,000 fire departments in the United States. There's 1.8 million firefighters, of which most of them are volunteers, quite frankly, right? So
Hmm.
there's a lot of people out there doing what we do and doing it for the love of the job. And, we're all responsible to just contribute a little bit to make it better for the next group.
I always like to say too, in being amongst firefighters, it reminds the average citizen out there that there's still really good people in this world. As you said at the beginning of the show, you get to meet phenomenal people from all over that are involved in this fire service. It's a great reminder that in today's nasty world, with all the nastiness out there and as you said earlier, the politics, the bad politics,
Yeah,
there
exactly.
are still really good people in this world,
That's
and
the
they're
truth.
wearing the Maltese cross.
100% right.
Mhm.
Right.
Any last words that you'd like to say, again, reinforcing that premise about the professional volunteer, and any last bits of advice you want to pass on to our listeners, Chief?
I would say first, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. It was really a pleasure, and really, thanks for reaching out. And I would just say that when you're in the firehouse, whatever firehouse you work in or volunteer in, just just talk to the other people that you are with, and try to just share your passion, share the passion that you have. Because obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're here for a reason, because you love what we do. So kind of try and pass it on, keep passing it on all the time, and let people know that this is a very noble calling, what we do, and that it's important to our communities. It's important to society that we have a professional volunteer and career fire service, right? It's important to society. It really is. Sometimes we take it for granted when we're in it, but it really is. And we're the protectors, just like the police departments. If we don't have law and order, and we don't have public safety in general, civilization breaks down, man. So we're part of that. We're part of maintaining a civil society. And so I think that it's a noble calling. It's an important calling. And, sometimes it sounds corny, but it's true, man. Like, we're part of that. We're part of making sure society stays society, a civil society. So, continue on, do great work, and I wish you all the best in the future.
Oh, fantastic. And the Chief, if anybody wanted to get a hold of you just to talk to, get some advice, bring you in for any of your leadership presentations or any of your presentations, what's the best way that a listener can get a hold of you?
So the best way to contact me is via email. So I'll give you my email address. Okay. My email address is RICHART, as in Thomas, J as in John, 1959 at gmail.com. So it's RICHARTJ 1959 at gmail.com.
Fantastic. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to spend with us on this podcast. Again, I know how busy you are, but it means a lot to me that you made the time to do this and gave such great advice on so many different topics. And just thank you so very, very much.
Well, thank you, Tom, and good luck to you in the future, and God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. And again, for the listeners, if anyone wants to get a hold of me, my email is tamerrill63 at AOL.com. Please check out my professional volunteer fire department Facebook page, my website. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. My website has a link to all the articles I've written for fire engineering, all my podcasts, different presentations that I've done. And, it's just so much information that I'd love to share with you. And remember, it's not too late it's not too early to start making plans for FDIC 2023, which will be April 24th to the 29th next year in Indianapolis. And as always, thank you to my fire engineering family and Chief Bobby Halton and everyone at Fire Engineering and Clarion Events for supporting all the podcasts on fire engineering. This one, of course, but also all the other great fire service podcasts. I'm so honored that you chose to listen to mine, and I remain committed to all of you to continue to focus on topics of relevance and important topics in our volunteer fire service. So thank you for joining me here tonight. My next show will be Tuesday, November 29th, and I promise again to have another great topic involving the volunteer fire service. So thanks again, folks. Please stay safe, and remember that true professionalism is defined not by any paycheck, and your residents are owed professional service delivered by professional firefighters representing a professional organization. Thank you, folks. Take care.